Okay, this lesson is entitled The Role of Government in Regeneration, and we're going to explain how national governments play a key role in regeneration. I will split this lesson into two parts because there's just too much to cover, so there will be two videos covering this lesson. I'm going to start with actually looking at a tree. This is a 250-year-old pear tree. So what's so special about the tree? Apart from the fact that it's full of blossom, it's also England's favourite tree. About 10,000 people voted for this particular tree. It was a poll conducted by the Woodland Trust. Now, again, you can ask, well, what's the idea? It's actually what's the what's the issue here? But it's actually in danger of being cut down. Its future is under threat because it lies on the proposed route of High Speed 2, the planned UK speed rail link between London and the north of the UK. You've learned about HS2 as part of your GCSE, so we're going to come back to that now. So for some people, the tree and its future actually symbolizes a little bit the opposition to HS2 because of the environmental damage it will cause. For other people, HS2 is really important because it could bring Britain's rail network into the 21st century and also support the regeneration of cities such as Birmingham. Now, this sort of highlights this sort of familiar debate quite often with any kind of infrastructure projects. There's the economic need, but there's also an environmental cost. So what's so important about HS2? Why is there so much attention given to HS2? Now, if you have to go back to transport policy. So the UK's transport policy since 1945 have pretty much consistently favoured expanding the road network rather than focusing on railways. So as a result, one of the reasons for this is that we've seen an enormous increase in the number of cars on the road. So in 1958 there were about 4.5 million cars, and in 2013 that had gone up to 35 million. Now, although the road network has expanded, it has actually not kept up with the growth in car ownership. So as a result, we have serious issues of congestion. And the UK has now actually the most congested roads in Europe. So if you look at this in a little bit more detail, you can see that areas in London and the southeast, sort of extending a little bit to Birmingham and Manchester along the M6 and Leeds along the M1, experience the worst congestion in the UK, and it costs the UK about 22 billion each year in lost time. So people just spending time in traffic jams. You can say, well, what about rail travel? Is that not a good alternative? And in a way it is, but it's also rail passenger traffic is also at its highest ever level. Rail passenger journeys have increased from under 1 billion per year in the year 2002 to 2003, so obviously financial year, to 1.65 billion in 2014. So that also means that some rail routes are close to capacity as well. So both our road network as well as our rail network are close to capacity. So let's have a look at HS2 in more detail. Again, this is a map, a similar kind of map that you've seen last year, the year before, when you looked at preparing for your GCSE exam. As you can see, there's a highlighted plan for HS2. There's a link there to a website or a video clip that I'll put on Google Classroom. And I would like you to watch that. Actually, it's embedded in a newspaper article. So have a look at that. It's quite a good video. So the UK really needs to increase develop new infrastructure because there's a growing population, and in order to plan for future economic growth, infrastructure has to develop. So looking at HS2, there are two distinctive phases. Hopefully you're familiar with that. So phase one, I'm going to highlight that here as well. There's the blue line here, goes from London up to Birmingham, a little bit further to Lichfield. And then phase two goes up to Manchester, Wigan here towards Wigan, and then up to Leeds as well. Obviously, there's phase three as well, taking it further up to Scotland. But we have, very little talk very little time is spent on that at the moment. If you think about a high-speed link, how fast are we're going? These trains go really fast, as it says here as well. So we talk about 250 miles per hour maximum speeds. So these are much faster than the trains we have at the moment. Obviously, there are benefits such as cutting journey times between large cities. It attracts investment north from London, so cities to the north here can actually benefit quite substantially from the investment, because there's obviously the shortage in distance between the main cities, and also the construction of the railway itself could be up to about 60,000 construction jobs. There are also some issues. One of the main issues for people that are living along those lines, so for example between London and Birmingham, large areas here, there are no stations. So communities living along those routes are actually not benefiting from the railway at all. So between all these major towns here as well, there are actually not going to be any railway stations. It's also going to take a very long time. I just updated this, that they don't expect phase one to be completed until 2028 at the earliest, and it's likely going to be later than that. And phase two will not be completed until 2035 at the earliest. So it's 15 years from now, but it may even be 20 years. Now, another problem about the route is that it passes through various so-called areas of outstanding natural beauty, AONBs, such as the Chilterns. And the other thing to remember is that HS2 requires actually completely new infrastructure, as you can see on that artist's impression as well at the bottom. It's not actually possible to use the existing rail network. So the trains are different, they're operating differently, and they also have to travel in straighter lines to allow for those high speeds. So our existing network, which is already close to capacity, is actually not sufficient, cannot be used by HS2. Again, here at the bottom, there's a link there to a video. Again, I would like you to watch that as well, and I'll put the link on Google Classroom. So what is the role of central government then in projects such as HS2? So first of all, the project is just too expensive for private companies to invest in. The estimated cost of HS2 has gone up to about 106 billion. Initially, they thought it was going to cost about 50 billion, but it's gone up already quite substantially. And also, as an engineering project, it's absolutely huge, massive. It's not only the tracks that need to be constructed, but you're also talking about new stations that need to be built, etc. So when completed as a real service, it's actually very unlikely to make any profit at all. And definitely not sort of recoup the huge investment costs. Now, the rail services in the UK are actually all privatized. There's actually, apart from one, Northern Rail, that's just been taken back into government ownership earlier this year because of underperforming. But even though they're all private companies, they actually receive quite a substantial annual subsidy. In 2017-18, they received 4.3 billion. So without those subsidies, there's no way they could operate. They would operate at a loss. So central government is therefore the only body that can actually provide that sufficient capital to build HS2. But it's also seen as an investment because actually government will receive franchising fees from train companies running the service, so to get some income from that. But also, most importantly, it generates that economic multiplier with higher company profits, increase in jobs due to improved transport links, and then therefore government will receive taxation revenue. Moving on, another sort of area where the government has an impact is meeting the demand for housing. So the need for extra housing in the UK at the moment is really urgent. So one of the reasons is there's a rapidly rising population, partly due to immigration, but also birth rates. There's also more households now than before. High divorce rates mean more housing needed. Households divide up and become smaller. We have the issue about overseas investors, people buying up property as an investment and leaving it then empty because it's an investment. That happens more in places like London and other large cities in the UK. There's also a very high need for affordable housing. Since the 1980s, a lot of social rented housing that were often rented out through councils were sold off through what's known as the right to buy scheme. That allowed to a shortage of suitable properties for people on lower incomes. So these are some graphs. I'll come back to that during our online lesson as well. As you can see here in the top left, the number of council-built houses completed since 1949 up to about 2016, and you can see sort of how that is changing. Here, this table, you can see how house building has changed as well from sort of 1950s or to Second World War. 1960, 70, 80, and you can see here the private enterprises are now predominantly involved in house building. Housing associations also a little bit, and local authorities like local councils very little. And this graph shows you the house demand gap by region. Have a look at that because it's a slightly confusing bar chart. Let's discuss that in the lesson, and I will find out from you how you interpreted that. Cornwall, the housing challenge, Cornwall quite specific. Cornwall is a rural area we'll come back to later, think about rural regeneration. But so Cornwall's population is growing, not only retired people, but also increasing number of families relocate there. Southwest England needs about 27,000 new homes each year, but only 16,000 are actually built annually. It's a low wage county, so average wages are quite low, but houses are quite expensive relative to earnings. And the demand for low-cost housing rose actually quite substantially in just between 2 years. So housing is essential for regeneration because people have to live somewhere if they work somewhere. So the government has a couple of challenges here. So can they sort of balance the loss of greenfield sites against housing needs? So allowing greenfield sites to be developed, or maybe lifting planning restrictions or in green belts or AONBs. So finally, I've got some tasks for you here. So I would like you to investigate the latest on HS2, use Google to find some information. Also use your notes to complete a cost-benefit analysis, and you can draw a little simple table like this to do that. So HS2 cost-benefit analysis, cost versus benefits. Here at the bottom you can see a definition of cost-benefit analysis. I then want you to think about another transport improvement where the role of central government is crucial. And then finally, also invest the current UK's government approach to increasing the number of properties available in the country. Again, use the internet to find some answer to that. Okay, so this was the first of 2 videos covering this particular lesson. Thank you for listening.